All right, guys, welcome back. And today's video, Unit 3 Outcome 1, Key Knowledges 5 and 6. So it's another one of these like double key knowledge dot point in one video. And both of those key knowledge dot points are associated with something called management styles, which is why we kind of treat them as one topic, if you like, and cover them in the one video. So here's our snapshot of the study design. In this here, you can see what I'm talking about. So management styles including, and then it lists a bunch of management styles. And then the next one, the appropriateness of management styles in relation to. So all to do with management styles. So we just cover the whole lot off in one key knowledge dot point that we call management styles. So look, this little graphic here kind of sums up a lot of what this is about. People do not leave bad jobs, but they leave bad bosses. So that's kind of a concept that kind of underlies a lot of what we're talking about when we're looking at management styles. So trying to work into this, what do we mean by management styles? So first off, think about if you have a job, okay? If you have a job, what makes a good manager for you? Okay, now this is a personal thing because it would be different for everybody. But in your mind, particularly if you've experienced good managers and bad managers, what was it about the good manager that made them good? What was it about the bad manager that made them bad? Now, if you don't actually have a job, or if you've never had a job, you could actually do this with teaching. What makes a good teacher? Okay, what makes a bad teacher? And again, think about what was it made them good or bad. How do you like to be managed? Again, if you have a job. If you don't have a job, how do you like your teaching to be structured? I guess is another way to look at that. Do you like to be given some freedom and responsibility to make decisions for yourself? Or are you the kind of person that just likes being told what to do and then just getting on with it? If you were actually supervising a small team at work, so for example, if you're a Macca's floor manager or shift manager, how would you go about motivating and managing your team? So looking at all of these questions kind of leads us into what we mean by management styles and start thinking about different management styles, okay? So everything there, all of those questions, everything comes back to management styles. Not that you realize that yet, but you will do very soon. Now, definition of a management style. If you ask to actually define the term management style itself, here's a few different versions. Again, don't necessarily need to learn them parrot fashion, but there's three things that do the job. One of them might resonate more than others for you. The manner and approach of providing direction, implementing plans and motivating people, characteristic ways of making decisions relating to subordinates, how a manager exercises their authority to ensure that objectives are achieved. Now, again, right now, even looking at those definitions, probably not giving you a great idea of where we're headed. But again, if you came back to those at the end of the video, I can assure you they would make a lot more sense to you once we've talked about the actual management styles and what they look like. These definitions will make more sense to you. So for now, get them down, but later they will actually kind of resonate with you a bit more. Fundamentally though, what we're talking about with all of this stuff, right, is how a manager communicates with their team and how they organize the work that needs to be done. So it's about communicating and organizing. It's the way in which the manager communicates and organizes. Okay, that's really fundamentally what we're talking about here. Now, the study design identifies 5 different styles, okay? Going back to that, when I showed you a snapshot of study design, they were in there. Now, these are our script, okay? Never, ever deviate from these 5. Again, if you Googled management styles, you're going to come up with thousands of different hits, all giving you a different range of management styles. And yeah, some of these would certainly be included in those lists, but there's going to be lots of lists. Some would identify 2 styles, 3, 5, 7. They might have some of these, they might have none of these, but as I have said multiple times now, and will keep saying, the study design is our Bible, okay? That guides everything that we do. So we are going to pretend that these are the only 5 possible management styles. We're going to look at those, no others. These are the only ones that you are ever going to use in any answers that you produce, okay? Now, just to kind of introduce them, this is basically a spectrum, okay? Now, I've done it kind of top to bottom there. Often you see it from left to right. So you'd see Autocratic on the left, then Persuasive, then Consultative, then Participative, and then on the right-hand side, Laissez-faire. So the spectrum would be going that way. Either way, when we look at it, and it is a spectrum because Autocratic is like absolutely the opposite to Laissez-faire. Autocratic and Persuasive are quite similar, and then Persuasive and Consultative are fairly similar. Consultative, Participative, and then Participative and Laissez-faire. So you can see it is a spectrum, okay, and that will become more clear as we talk about each style individually. So it is a spectrum, and on that spectrum, if we're talking about the spectrum going top to bottom as you see it on the screen here, as we move more towards the top of the styles, the focus from the manager's point of view becomes on the task, getting the job done, okay? Using styles at the top of the spectrum there, we're not really thinking about the people, okay? We're just thinking about getting the job done, and that's the main focus that we have. Whereas as we move down through the spectrum towards the bottom here, towards laissez-faire, now the focus, although there's still a focus, we still need to get the job done, the focus is much more on thinking about the impact of what we're doing on the people that we are managing, okay? Again, as we go through this video, these concepts will become, I think, more clear to you. Towards the top of the spectrum, decision-making and control is centralized around the manager. Centralized control and centralized decision-making. When we say centralized, we're meaning around the manager. So basically what we're saying here, as we're at the top of the spectrum, the manager is making all the decisions, has all the control. But as we move down through the spectrum to the other end, towards the laissez-faire, we're moving towards a more decentralized approach. So where it is not just the manager that has control and not just the manager that is making all the decisions. As we'll find out, that's when the team kind of makes shared decisions. So we move from one style of management where we have absolute control through to the opposite end where that control is relinquished and we're sharing the control and the decision making. Communication, similarly, with autocratic managers at the one extreme of the spectrum, they just use one-way top-down communication. So when they're talking to their staff, telling them what to do, but they're not listening to any feedback. They're not interested and they don't listen to any feedback coming towards them. So hence the one-way communication and hence top-down. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, we've very much got two-way communication going on where the manager is talking to the staff, listening to opinions, taking the feedback on board. Okay, so we're going to talk about these ideas a little bit more as we go through the styles. So what we're trying to achieve, right, in this video, so by the end of this video and by the time you've got your notes, with each of these 5 styles, okay, that we're going to talk through, first off, you need to sort of describe or explain each of them in different levels of detail. You know, you might need to describe it, you know, for 1 mark, 2 marks, 4 marks. So once you've got your information, you'll make a judgment on how much you need to pull from that, depending on the question you're facing. You need to be able to come up with some advantages and disadvantages of using each of these 5 styles. You need to compare them to one another. So compare the autocratic management style with the laissez-faire management style. So coming up with similarities and differences between the two of them. You need to work out which one is being used given some case information. So it might give you some information about a business and what the manager is doing with that business, and it says which style are they using. So using the information it's giving you to be able to identify which by recognizing which of the styles given the information you're about to get in your notes. You might need to discuss why the management style being used is either appropriate or not appropriate. So again, in the case you've got to identify which style is being used and then say, yeah, that is the right style for this scenario, or that's not the right style. It would be better to use this style instead, and justify why that would be the case. And then suggesting which style should be used given some case information. So here's a scenario the manager faces. Which management style do you suggest they adopt? Okay. And then say why. So that is kind of what we're aiming for at the end of this video. That's what you should be able to do. Now, that's actually a little easier than it might look. Because there's 5, that seems like a lot to do with 5. The reality is that as we go through these, you're going to find that the first 2, Autocratic and Persuasive, are very, very similar. There's really only one key difference. When you're describing, explaining each and the advantages and disadvantages, it's really the same description and the same advantages and disadvantages, by one thing. When we get to Consultative and Participative, again, bring those together because, again, they're pretty much identical except for one key thing. And then Laissez-faire. So really it's kind of, you're really learning, to be honest, 3 different lists. And then those just couple of key differences between those 2, which we're kind of lumping together. So let's get into it. First off, Autocratic. If we're going to describe the Autocratic management style, so this is the type of manager that wants to be in absolute control. Okay, they expect their team to comply with their commands without question. Just do what they're told and just get on with it. Focused on getting the job done. Okay, they're looking for maximum efficiency at all times, and they can actually put a lot of pressure on their team to achieve that. They're not really concerned with how the people in the team feel about all of this. All that matters is hitting the targets, hitting the KPIs, meeting the goals, doing all of that stuff. They don't really care if they're upsetting, offending, annoying the team. They just want to get the job done. Okay, a control freak. I wouldn't necessarily use that term in an answer, but if you know the term control freak, that kind of is what we're talking about here. Now, this style can result in passive resistance from the employees. Okay, so in other words, the employees are not necessarily going to stand up and say no to the manager, but quietly in the background, they might just kind of not do the work as quickly or as well as they could done because basically they're pissed off. Okay, so they're just going to passively resist. Also, this style is probably going to lead to an increase in staff absenteeism. This is not a style that people, generally speaking, like to be managed by. Not true of everybody. Some people it's okay for, but generally speaking, people don't like. And from what I've said already, you probably picked up on that vibe. And when people don't like something that's happening at work, often they take sickies. The colloquialism there, they take time off sick, even if they're not really sick. They will go off on sick. That's what an increase in staff absenteeism is. Staff absenteeism is staff not being at work when they should be at work. And if absenteeism increases, ultimately that can lead to an increase in staff turnover. Staff turnover is when people leave the business. So first off, so they're getting pissed off because they're being managed in a way they don't like. They start taking sickies. They start looking for another job, and ultimately they get another job and they leave. Okay, that's kind of where this heads. So yeah, most people don't like to be managed in this way. And for that reason, it is not, generally speaking, a good idea to use this management style on an ongoing basis. Yeah. However, if you are suddenly facing some kind of crisis situation or an emergency, this style might be necessary in order to get things done quickly, to deal with that scenario, deal with that situation. And then once that's dealt with, then you can move back to one of the other styles, which we're going to be talking about. So hopefully that makes some sense. Like if you're managing in a kind of, I'd say a softer style, which we'll get to shortly, but if something important happens, right, okay, all hands on deck. We just need to deal with this, get it done. You do this, you do this, you do this. Once we've dealt with that crisis situation, then we can go back to a more appropriate longer term management style. The other situation is kind of suitable to a certain industry, certain type of business environments. And I've put e.g. hospitality. So what I'm talking about here is environments where, largely speaking, you do not have highly motivated, not necessarily highly skilled, sometimes not highly educated workers. Those type of people often need to be told what to do, because if you don't, nothing gets done. Okay, so again, as we explore the other styles, some of what we said in previous styles will kind of become more into context to make more sense. So there are a couple of scenarios where autocratic is good, but generally speaking, in the long run, no. Some features. Okay, so you could incorporate some of what I just said in features, but just specific features. And I'm also going to do the features under the same headings for each of the styles to sort of kind of consistency. And you could actually maybe lay this information out in a table. It's actually a good way to do it. So in terms of control and authority with autocratic, managers in total control and absolutely retains authority. Decision making, all decisions are made by the manager, centralized, talked about that before, and then subordinates are told what to do. Communication, strictly hierarchical, one way, top down. Input from employees, there is no value placed whatsoever on input or opinion from employees. And motivating factor, basically what we're saying here is the manager believes that the main motivator for people doing work is money and nothing else, right? They're just motivated by money. So we're going to see that structure as we go through the other styles as well. Persuasive, okay? So one style, one position to the right or underneath in our spectrum, the next position along in our spectrum. So really, really similar to autocratic in terms of its list of features, advantages, disadvantage. But as I kind of alluded to before, one key difference. With this style, rather than just telling employees what to do and then expecting them just to get on with it, this manager, in addition to telling them what to do, will also explain the reasons behind those decisions, like the reasons that they're doing what they're doing as well. Okay, it's kind of a subtle difference, but it can make a big difference. So instead of just saying, right, you do this, you do this, you do this, you're going to say, right, you do this, you do this, you do this. And the reason you're doing it is this. Okay, that's the one key difference. Often that's going to be framed in such a way as to convince the employee the decision was made in the best interest for them. Okay, that's a clever way to do it. Because if the employee's been told what to do, but then the manager's also explaining in such a way that to them it makes sense that this is in my own best interests, they're more likely to buy into it and be happy and do the work. So hopefully that makes some sense. Outside of that, everything else is the same. Okay. So using this style, if you're just comparing it with autocratic, should result in a little less resistance from employees because now they're being sold on the decisions being made. They're being told a little bit about the reason for the decisions. So that resistance we talked about with autocratic will reduce a little bit. Again, not a great style to use on an ongoing long-term basis in most environments. Again, except in a crisis or an emergency, or maybe that hospitality type environment where you have, not motivated and, not highly skilled workers maybe. So again, I'm basically saying everything as with autocratic, but just that one key difference. So again, features, really it's the same list. And this is what I said before about you don't have to learn 5 lists. All of that stuff is really the same as for autocratic, but the only difference is that little addition in the pink there. This time they are provided with the reasons for the decision, whereas with autocratic, you didn't even go as far as that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now consultative. Now we're definitely changing our style. So now we're kind of, I'd say, autocratic and persuasive sit a little group together. Now we're moving into the next little group, which includes consultative and participative. So we're now moving along, and I've said spectrum left to right. That's if you wrote them left to right, as opposed to how I had them before, which was top to bottom. So as we move from left to right or top to bottom, this is the first style that actually really genuinely takes the feelings of the team members or the employees into account in any kind of a meaningful way. Now, the manager still makes the final decision here, okay? Still make the final decision, but they do that after consulting with the team members, okay? So what they'll do, they'll ask their team members their opinions. They'll ask them from input. And then that manager would make a final decision based on taking into account all of those opinions and all of that input. Okay. So hopefully you're going to end up with a more balanced and a more informed decision than if the manager just made it straight off the bat themselves. So this now is actually a pretty good style for using on an ongoing kind of long-term basis for most people. Okay. People now feel involved in the process, and most people want that. Most people want to feel involved. Okay. You do have those people that don't, they just want to go to work, do what they're told, collect the paycheck and go home. But generally speaking, in the workplace, most people want to feel a sense of involvement. So if you're doing this because the manager's asking opinions, you're getting that sense of involvement that you're looking for. Less likely now to get resistance from employees because employees feel part of the process. They feel like they've contributed to it. And you're more likely to have happy, productive employees, and therefore less of that absenteeism and staff turnover that we're talking about, which are bad things. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. So you're really genuinely taking input from your employees here, rather than just saying, this is what we're doing, or with Persuasive, this is what we're doing and why. Okay, so some features. In terms of control authority, things start to change here, okay? The manager is definitely still in control and definitely retains authority, but now they're doing that whilst taking opinions and input from the employees. So it's a little different. Decision-making, again, still made by the manager, so still centralized, but after consultation with the employees, which is where the name Consultative comes from. Communication. Now for the first time we're seeing two-way communication. Still really top-down, okay? Still predominantly it's the manager making decisions, but it is two-way because the manager is now seeking opinions, he's now listening to opinions and feedback from the employees. So for the first time we're seeing this two-way communication going on. Input from employees. Now there is value placed on input from opinions on employees. I won't say any more about that. I've just talked about that a lot. And the motivating factor, now this type of manager believes that it isn't just money that motivates people coming to work. This type of manager believes that some motivation comes from being involved and contributing in some way. Okay, I definitely believe that is the case. And the type of manager I was probably him, in fact, probably even further along the spectrum. But yes, hopefully you can now see the management styles changing as we move along this spectrum. Participative. So this is the next one in this little group of two, I would call it. And as with where are we to begin? Autocratic and Persuasive, where they were pretty much identical bar one thing. Consultative and participative, also pretty much identical, except one thing. Okay. We're now getting onto a style that is much more focused on people than task. Remember that first little diagram, the arrow, task focus, people focus. Now, again, that isn't to say that these managers, don't care about getting the job done. Okay. They clearly do. A manager needs to get the job done. They have KPIs to meet. They have objectives they need to meet. They have goals they've got to reach. It's just that the approach to getting there is different using this type of style. Here, we have a manager who genuinely trusts and values their team's opinions and input. Okay. For the first time now, we actually have a shared decision between the manager and the team. And that's the key difference between this and the previous one, Consultative. Whereas with Consultative, the manager would seek the input, seek the employees from the team, then make a decision using that input. Here, what happens is we have a genuine shared decision. Okay. So the manager, think about it in a very simplistic way. There's a decision to be made. We've got two options, A and B. The manager says, right, put your hand up. Who goes for A? 5 people do. Put your hand up. Who goes for B? 8 people do. Okay, we're going to go with option B. So it's a genuine shared decision. Okay. So the consultative manager makes the final decision after consulting. Here we have a genuine shared decision being made between the team. So this is another style that works for most of the people most of the time in terms of being managed in this way. And it's generally a style that keeps employees happy and, again, keeps absenteeism, staff turnover, and all that stuff to a minimum, just like the previous one. So in terms of the features, control authority, for the first time now, genuinely shared. Okay, so the control and authority for the first time now is decentralized. Okay, this is now a genuinely shared situation. Decision making, decentralized, genuine shared decisions being made between management and employees. Communication, genuinely two ways with employees and managers sharing ideas. Input from employees. Now we've got a lot of value being placed on the input from the employees. And the motivating factor, I believe that great motivation comes from contributing. This is way more important than just money. So you can hopefully see how things are shifting as we're moving along. So that's 4 of them. The 5th one, laissez-faire. Now this does kind of stand kind of on its own a little. Literal translation, I'm assuming you picked up that this is a French term, allow to do. Laissez-faire, allow to do. And that's exactly what this style is all about. Very, very hands-off approach where the manager communicates key business objectives with employees and then allows the employees to make decisions themselves about how they achieve those objectives. So employees are really, really given free rein here, have a lot of freedom in how they operate. And management there basically just to support, provide advice and guide as required. Okay, they don't get too involved. Okay, if you think autocratic, another way to think of autocratic is micromanaging. This is completely hands-off, very much the opposite of micromanaging. This style of management really gives employees a high level of responsibility and ownership over their activities. And this is only suited to environments where you've got employees who are really highly educated, highly skilled, highly motivated. Okay, if you try this style with anything outside of that, it's not going to work. You often find this style of management in creative industries such as marketing, advertising, media, and also tech. The tech industries use this. The tech industries that they hire a lot of super smart people. Yeah, very, very clever, very intelligent people, highly educated, and also highly motivated within their careers. If you try to micromanage those type of people, not going to work. So what you do is you kind of, this is what we're trying to achieve, and you kind of let them achieve it for you. So hopefully that makes sense. We've gone from autocratic through laissez-faire through the other styles in the middle, and you can see how that changes. So features here, control authority now sits completely with the employees. Managers really hands off. Decision making completely decentralized now. Genuine two-way communication, employees and managers still sharing ideas, great value still, so not too much different to these latter ones from the last style, and again, motivating factor. So again, you can see how these features, as we move styles next to each other, the features are often common. You know, they only change really from one end of the spectrum to the other. But yeah, that kind of makes sense because it's a spectrum. You know, it's shifting from one really extreme style to another extreme style, going through, you know, different stages to get there. Now, just going to quickly put in there some advantages and disadvantages for these styles as well. And look, we've kind of covered off on some of these. I've talked a bit about them, but just to get these down, it's really important that you have a really good solid list of all these things to draw from. So look, I'm not going to spend ages talking about these. Autocratic, going back right, to the one at the extreme. Look, an advantage is quick. Okay, decision making is quick. Only one person involved. You're not listening to anyone else. You're just making decisions, so it's quick. And that's a comparative. Okay, to say the style is quick compared to the other styles because of the nature of how it's being done. Another advantage is here. Look, while decisions are being made only by one person, you're not getting input from the team. At least you could argue that the decisions are being made by a knowledgeable and experienced person. Okay. Employees' roles are firmly defined. They know exactly what's expected of them because they're told in no uncertain terms, this is what is expected of you. Absolute focus on production efficiency. So generally things do get done, at least in the short run. And like I said before, this suits high risk or business critical decisions. Okay. If we go into that situation, even if you're not using this style, you can maybe jump into this style temporarily. Disadvantages. Look, a quick decision is not always the best decision. Yeah. It discourages teamwork, which is generally seen as a bad thing. Doesn't allow for feedback, open communication, and you might actually be missing out on some valuable opinions and input from employees. You might have some super experienced people in your team that have great ideas. If you're operating autocratically, you're not listening to them. You're missing out on potentially some great ideas that could help the business move forward. Lead to lower job satisfaction, lower motivation, increased staff absenteeism and turnover. I explained how that happens before. Too task focused, does not take into account the employee's needs, and it can create this sense of feeling of kind of being kept in the dark amongst the employees. That's not a positive thing. People like to kind of feel like they're not being lied to, not being manipulated. And this one, you're not really being told anything, so you feel like the boss is just keeping you in the dark. Not ideal. Persuasive. Again, like I said, this is easy because the list is really the same. So the same lists as we just looked at for Autocratic, except the one key difference here, the last advantage for Autocratic was about employees feeling they're being kept in the dark. That sense might be reduced because the manager's now at least explaining the reasons for decisions. But outside of that, same advantages and disadvantages. Consultative. Advantages of using that style. Now we've got a greater variety of ideas and opinions coming from the employees, and therefore you might end up with better quality and more informed decisions being made. Particularly, like I said before, if you have really experienced people in your team, might have great ideas. Why not make the most of them? Employee involvement increases. That leads to all those benefits such as increased job satisfaction, higher engagement of your staff, lower absenteeism and turnover, all of that stuff. The relationship between management and employees generally is better when using this style because of the increased communication. Any scenario where managers and employees are talking, communicating, generally leads to a better relationship between the two parties. Better communication and then high levels of trust. Okay, so it's good as an employer to have your employees feeling that they trust you. And again, that leads to, more engagement, job satisfaction, lower absenteeism, turnover, and all that stuff. So all of that stuff definitely improves when you're using this type of a style. And it also allows for greater development of employees, okay? Employees can become involved in the decision-making process and actually develop their skills and experience further than if you were kind of putting a bar on them being able to do that. So it actually allows them to maybe develop their own careers by becoming more involved in decisions than they would do with those other types of styles we just talked about. Disadvantages, and again, this is compared with those task-focused styles of Autocratic and Persuasive, it's more time-consuming because you don't have one manager just going quickly, we're going to do this. We're now obviously talking to people, gaining their opinions, which obviously is going to take longer. You also have the problem potentially that your employees might not actually have the knowledge, the skills, the expertise, or even the desire to actually be involved in the decision-making process. So if you're going to be consultative, you're asking them their opinion, they might not care, or they might not actually have the ability to provide you with a decent opinion anyway. So there's an issue you need to think about. Employees can still feel demotivated with this style if they feel that they have provided their opinions and their input to you, and then you just pretty much disregard it and do your own thing anyway. Because remember, with this style, the manager is still making the decision. So it can be quite dangerous, particularly if you've and often the manager's already gone into this scenario, maybe having a pretty good idea of which direction they're going to go in. You then be consultative and you talk to your team. And what now if pretty much all of the team gives you opinions and input which would take you in a different direction to the one you're thinking you're going, and then at the end of the day you make the decision you were already going to make, then they're going to feel that, why did you bother asking if you just ignore us? You know what I mean? So can be a bit dangerous there. And also we now have the potential for conflict because people have different views and opinions. So there's definitely if you're not asking, then you're going to have no conflict. But if you're going to ask for opinions, be prepared for potential conflict from within the team. Participative. Again, the advantages are going to be really, really similar to consultative. Okay. Again, the list here, I don't need to talk through this now. Very, very similar. Like I said before, Persuasive and Autocratic were very similar. These two styles are very, very similar. And again, with the disadvantages, nothing particularly new there. A lot of repetition. Moving on to laissez-faire, the advantages. This is just kind of taking some of those ones we just looked at and taking them to the extreme, really. Look, the high employee independence leads to high levels of empowerment and job engagement and satisfaction and all of those things that we previously talked about. Really, really good environment for creativity and innovation, which is why those creative industries and tech businesses tend to use this style. Encourages teamwork. Teamwork, as everybody knows, you generally achieve more working as a team than working individually. So that's a positive. And this kind of decentralized, a much more flat management structure with less layers in it, encourages much more open communication across the business. Okay, allows ideas to flourish and kind of, come to fruition much more than if we have these layers of management. And, it's tough to break through it all. So if we have this decentralized structure with everybody talking, ideas can kind of, be realized much more easily. Disadvantages with laissez-faire, that the lack of guidance that is inherent in this style means that some employees are going to lose direction, and that can actually make them feel quite unsettled. Like some employees feel they need the direction. And it definitely does not suit unskilled or unmotivated employees who need the structure, who need the routine tasks. Okay. So when best to use each style? So now this is kind of building in both of the dot points, which were underneath, we're treating as one key knowledge dot point management styles. So again, already through the notes you've got, and if you've been listening, you should probably be able to answer this already, but I'm just going to summarize it for you anyway. Autocratic and persuasive, okay, they're very task focused. When do we use this style? When decisions need to be made quickly, okay, if there's time constraints. We're up against the clock for whatever reason. If time is of the essence, use autocratic and persuasive. And then, of course, as I've already said a couple of times, when the employees are lacking in knowledge and or experience, or if they're not motivated, lacking in knowledge, experience and or motivation, I would say. Right, consultative and participative. These are the two which most of the time, 95%, I don't know, but most of the time are the two styles that you should be choosing. So, you know what? When you see exam questions, 9 out of 10 exam questions where the question has been suggest the most suitable style for the manager to use in this scenario, 9 out of 10 times you would choose either consultative or participative, and you could choose either or and just justify. Unless the scenario is hinting that either there is some kind of crisis about to happen or going on, or that your employees are super motivated and super highly educated, so on and so forth. Unless it's going in one of those directions, then really your answer is always going to be from consultative, participative. So basically, when you use these styles is when employees have the experience, knowledge, and the understanding to actually contribute to the decision-making process. When more complex decisions or increased levels of problem solving are involved, you're getting more opinion, more input, and again, when there is time. Laissez-faire, as already said, only when you've got highly educated, highly qualified, highly skilled, highly motivated employees, and or when high levels of creativity or innovation are required. So there we go, back to our study design. The final part now, the appropriateness in relation to nature of task, time, experience. Look, this is pretty quick and easy. Okay, so the appropriateness of the style, again, talking through the spectrum. Okay, as we move more towards the task, the autocratic, so the top or the left of the spectrum, that's more suited to simple tasks. And as we move to the other end of the spectrum, more towards laissez-faire, as we move through. And again, this is a continuum, a spectrum, more complex tasks. Simple as that. That's all you need to be aware of there. In terms of time, the autocratic and persuasive are more suited to tasks where there is less time available. You're up against it. And moving across to the more people-focused styles, participative, laissez-faire, much more suited when there is more time for things to happen. And the experience of employees, again, this one should be obvious to you by now. Autocratic end of the spectrum, suited to your inexperienced employees, and your laissez-faire end is suited more to your highly experienced employees. Manager preference. Every manager has a preferred style, like every teacher has a preferred style. So autocratic, you find those managers that really need to be in control. I mentioned the term control freak. Probably don't use that, but that's what we mean. And your laissez-faire managers, much less desire to be in control, much more happy to let people kind of run their own show, if you like. So revisit this. Now, if you look back at your notes, you should see that you could now, obviously not off the top of your head because there's a fair bit of content there, but using your notes, if you ask anything within this structure here, you should now be able to do it, okay? Compare them to one another. Obviously, I've not gone into that because there's so many different combinations, permutations of what you could compare. But if you have a list of features for two different styles, you should easily be able to come up with the ways in which they're similar and ways in which they're different. So that should be pretty easy to do. But that now should be completely doable for you. Hopefully you can do that. We've achieved what we set out to achieve. That is it for management styles. So I will see you in the next video for Key Knowledge 7. Cheers for now.